Everybody seeing my first slide? Awesome. So hello, everybody. We would like to welcome you all to our panel presentation titled Hot off the Press, Student Newspapers and Primary Source Instruction. These are the presenters who will be hosting the session today. I am Sudha Anand, the Digital Collections Librarian from Indiana University, Bloomington. I'll get this session started with a presentation on Indiana University's Bicentennial Student Newspapers Project. I'll be sharing with you about our effort to make digitally available our student newspapers from across 7 IU campuses. Student-run campus newspapers are powerful primary sources that document the cultural, social, political, and educational life of a university community, offering a rich pedagogical resource for critically engaging historical events and lived experience, functioning simultaneously as primary evidence and interpretive media texts. On the other hand, when used as secondary sources, they enable students to critically examine how historical events are interpreted, framed, and mediated within specific institutional and cultural contexts. Indiana University celebrated a remarkable milestone, its bicentennial, on January 20, 2020. 200 years of history, innovation, and student life. As part of this milestone, there were several key initiatives and projects that were launched, and one of those is the Bicentennial Student Newspapers Project under the Media Digitization and Preservation Initiative. Student newspapers meticulously captured decades of student perspectives, campus culture, and historical moments. The goal was simple yet powerful: to preserve campus history by digitizing student newspapers and making them accessible to everyone. The process was ambitious. We inventoried and digitized newspapers from 7 IU campuses that spanned over a century. And the result, a treasure trove of student life, freely available through the IU Digital Collections repository. Now, anyone, students, researchers, and alumni can explore these stories anytime, anywhere. Especially in times such as ours, we definitely understand the value of free speech and the need to document history. More than objects of history and curiosity, student newspapers are excellent pedagogical resources to engage students. With the shift to digital environments and the rise of online and distance education, the use of digitized primary and secondary sources in teaching and research has grown significantly. Digital newspapers, in particular, are highly searchable by title, keyword, date, and author, enabling multiple entry points for discovering and engaging with the content. Here's a quick overview of the student newspapers from each IU campus, along with the coverage periods that was planned for this project. Overall, the coverage spans from 1930s through 2019, close to a century worth of newspaper issues. These newspapers are in print format and are of different dimensions, with several special issues, seasonal issues, and supplements, including 2-page spreads. Before we proceed further, here's a quick peek into some significant issues from our student newspapers. The first one is one of the earliest issues in our repository, published by the Kokomo campus students in 1932. The second marks IU Bloomington's 125th year homecoming celebration. The third issue records the partnership established between Indiana and Purdue universities to establish IUPUI in April of 1969. And the final image is from IUPUI Sagamore, a special issue published on January 1st, 2000, looking back at the past 100 years. But here's the challenge. These newspapers are fragile. Time, handling, and environmental factors threaten their survival. If we lose them, we lose the authentic stories of student voices, creativity, and everyday life. Digitization was the best solution, not only for providing easy and unrestricted access, but also to preserve this rich primary resource over time. IU's Digital Collection Service was selected as the repository of choice to provide a home to these digitized newspapers to offer free and unrestricted access to the community. IU's Digital Collection serves as an institutional-wide repository for 2D and document-based archival material. IU's digital collections platform is entirely based on open source software, augmented with the integration of a IIIF viewer for image sharing and manipulation. All text-based files contained in the repository have optical character recognition run on them to enable full text searching. Though the newspapers were from different campuses due to staff and budget constraints, as well as the specialized training required, the digital repository work was handled solely by the digital collections team. As this list suggests, there was a lot of emphasis on standardization for collection setup and metadata to ensure ease of overall administration and maintenance. I began this complex project by establishing contacts with collection managers working with the student newspapers project at each campus location. Following this, there followed several meetings among the digital collection team members to develop a base level expectation for the collection model and metadata. Any issues that warranted collection manager input was sought and discussed. We also ensured that every step and decision made was well documented. After much discussion, this final set of metadata fields was assessed to be a good fit to support the multi-campus collection. We went back and forth about the inclusion of several metadata options, but decided to avoid including some and combining others in a single field. The system displays a metadata field only if it has data in it, so some additional fields, like the notes field, was included to accommodate special requests. Some decisions were made to standardize the title field to ensure easy sorting and uniformity while searching, but the gaps were filled using the printed date fields. Here you can see an example of a spring 1993 issue with the standardized title and printed date fields. These are some of the metadata standardization situations for the issue title and how they were handled across all campuses. We definitely got some pushback from a few collection managers, and there were some discussions before a unanimous decision was made. And here are a couple more standardizations, one for inclusion of information about supplemental issues, and one to address unlisted editor information. Next, we modeled the collection structure with a top level or campus collection with sub-collections for each newspaper title. Here you can view the landing pages of few of the campus level collections. Once the metadata was cleaned and transformed, the next steps was to generate access files for the repository that supported easy image manipulation and other access functionalities, as well as enabled full text searching. Here's an example of a newspaper issue, in this case, a 1986 issue of Indiana Daily Student that was recently added. The optical character recognition file in the backend, along with the IIIF viewer, assists in performing searches and highlighting terms inside the work images. Issues were ingested in batches, followed by thorough quality checks. Here's a list of all the quality checks that were performed. After the quality checks were completed, collection managers were notified so they could perform a quick review and inform their campus about the availability of digitized student newspapers. Initial batch of Bloomington student newspapers digitized were only the Collegiate Digest and the short 12 years of the IDS from 1937 to 1949. There were a lot more issues that needed funds for digitization. The IDS is the key student newspaper publication of IU Bloomington, the flagship campus, and began publishing in 1867 with daily issues since 1899, though the publication has scaled back to weekly issues in recent times due to funding constraints. While the conversion and efforts to raise funds for further digitization of the IDS issues was ongoing, we learned from the IDS editor that they were saving PDF versions of several issues since 1980. Using these PDFs in digital collections would help us save a lot of digitization costs and also work as a step for long-term preservation, since PDF is a standardized preservation format. But before we could address technical feasibility, we had to ensure naming and metadata compliance. The IDS PDF issues did not follow any naming format and were grouped by year. special issues rather haphazardly. So we needed to do some legwork to make sure we had the required naming convention in place to be able to preserve the PDF files, as well as do an in-depth inventory and gather metadata. First service level question we encountered was, do we work on system development to incorporate a PDF viewer to support ingest and display PDF files? Or do we come up with a workflow to convert the PDF files into individual TIFF images, which would then be processed through our derivative workflow to generate individual page level pyramidal TIFF files? We decided to go with door number two. This was due to the fact that since we had a triple IF viewer integration, it provided functionality such as annotations and comparisons, high levels of zooming, single and paged viewing, structure editing, and of course the triple IF manifest that acts as a packaging of the visual and metadata parts of the work record so that it can be shared cross-institutionally and provide advanced image manipulation capabilities. The drawback of integrating a PDF viewer and using it to display the PDF copy of the newspaper issue was that PDF viewers download a local temporary copy and only accommodate text-based manipulation of the object without any image manipulation capabilities. In addition, digital collections also had a PDF download feature enabled, which provided the user with a PDF download of the entire issue. Here is a sample issue of a digitized newspaper and a born digital PDF that was processed with the workflow created, along with the associated metadata record. As you can see, the end user cannot differentiate either record's origin and therefore presents a uniform output to the users. Before I conclude, I want to share a few fun IIIF tools that can be used in teaching and outreach using the images in IU digital collections or any IIIF-enabled collection. And you can find more through a Google search. I've also included a bonus how to image to generate the IIIF URL. The process to digitize the IU student newspapers has been eventful and a wonderful learning opportunity. We have and continue to successfully transform decades of campus history into an accessible, searchable, and preservable digital format by leveraging locally developed workflows and quality assurance processes. We continue to fundraise in an attempt to get all the IDS issues digitized and ingested into digital collections for perpetual digital access. Over 9,500 digitized student newspaper issues are now available for research, teaching, and community engagement, preserving institutional memory for future generations. By providing quick and easy online access to these rich primary sources, we want to ensure that the content remains accessible to our students, faculty, and researchers, and remains at the forefront of academic research and scholarship. Thank you for joining me today. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at the end of the panel. I'm handing it over to Mare Lodu and Janine Smith.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Janine Smith. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. My name is Janine Smith. I am the University Archivist and Special Collections Registrar here at Loyola University, New Orleans. In addition to doing a lot of primary source instruction, we also, Mare and I, teach in the first year seminar program, and I am the library liaison to the Languages and Cultures Department, as well as Classical Studies. And I'm going to hand it over to Mare to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mare Lodu. I'm the Digital Collections Archivist at Loyola, so I'm responsible for developing, managing, and preserving our digital collections. And I also serve as a liaison librarian for the film and design departments and provide library and archives instruction. Next slide, please. So just to briefly go over our agenda for today, we'll talk about the Maroon newspaper and the Louisiana Digital Library, which is also known as the LDL. We'll then discuss our lesson plans that we use for our instruction sessions, as well as our document analysis activity using the Maroon newspaper. And then we'll follow that with two examples of successful sessions that we've had recently, and then we'll end our presentation with our future goals for our primary source instruction program. Next slide.
So, The Maroon is a widely regarded publication on campus, and it recently celebrated its 100th anniversary as it was established in 1923. It's an entirely student led publication with one faculty advisor, and it is a weekly newspaper that publishes on Friday mornings during the academic year. And I did just want to take a moment to brag about how much we love The Maroon. It's been named best all around student newspaper among small college newspapers by the Society of Professional Journalists, and it has won numerous national awards, including the Edward R. Murrow Award from the Radio Television Digital News Association and Pacemaker Awards from the Associated College Press, which is known as the Pulitzer Prize of College Journalism. Next slide, please. So this is the homepage of the Maroon's website. I wanted to give you a sampling of the stories that students are covering. They really have a pulse on what is important to students on campus and beyond, covering everything from Gen Z interest, campus events, student and faculty grievances, to local and national politics. And I thought it was appropriate to include that they regard themselves not as a student newspaper, but rather a community newspaper serving a university. Next slide, please.
So the Maroon newspaper is available digitally on the Louisiana Digital Library, or the LDL. The LDL is a consortium of libraries, archives, and museums across the state of Louisiana, and this is where all of our digital collections are made available. The LDL is a really great resource for students and faculty who are looking to access legacy issues of the newspaper outside of our physical collection. And as you can see, they're organized by year and then by issue. Next slide, please. So in terms of the lesson plan, we usually begin each session with introductions so that students understand what our role is as archivists, in order to understand the difference between a library and an archive. We briefly discuss our collecting scope and the kinds of collections that we hold in case anyone is interested in visiting the reading room outside of class. We then go over our reading room guidelines regarding, the typical food and drink, photography, pens, handling materials with care, and keeping things in original order. But the two primary learning objectives for our instruction sessions are that, one, students will understand and implement guidelines for handling archives and special collections, and two, students will conduct research using primary source materials. But the session as a whole is usually centered around a document analysis activity, which Janine will discuss in more detail in a bit. But we usually end each session with a group discussion or sort of think, pair, share. Next slide, please.
So this activity worked incredibly well. Mare and I co-taught an English critical reading and writing class in the beginning of the fall semester. And then I repeated the activity with a first-year seminar course titled Facts and Misinformation towards the end of the semester. I curated a group of newspapers so that each student would have an issue in front of them. And for the most part, I selected issues that I found to be interesting or relevant in some way, including protests on campus, the issues before and after Hurricane Katrina, and the dates span between the 1920s to the mid-2000s. So students were asked to peruse the newspaper for a few minutes, looking over each section of the newspaper as well as the advertisements. And then they were to select an article that piqued their interest or resonated with them in some way. Students were asked to look over the newspaper for a few minutes, and then they were asked to identify a headline, a byline, a date, the section where the article was located, and then asked to formulate a research question. Students would then share out about their selected article. There were great conversations about issues that have stayed important and relevant to students across generations and what has completely changed or what is no longer acceptable by today's standards. And they love to point out how frequent cigarette ads ran and are always shocked by the way smoking is depicted, like the advertisement on the slide. This is a great way for students to gain a better understanding of Loyola's history while identifying personal connections and emerging patterns and concepts within this history. Next slide, please. In this example, for this particular course, Latin American Youth Subcultures, I collaborated with the professor to create a document analysis activity that was tailored to this particular class and used questions that relate to the sociology scientific method, which she teaches in this course. Students analyzed Maroon articles through the digital archive, the Louisiana Digital Library, as they relate to youth subcultures, protests, and historical events. Students work through a series of questions related to intersections of identity, influences of Latin America, and whether they appear arbitrarily or if deeper connections could be made. While it was a decent class, I think it would have been more successful if students were using the physical newspapers. There seemed to be a bit of a disconnect, especially since students, in my opinion and experience, have very little exposure to digital collections and archives as undergrads. I think students would have made better connections to the digital collections when they're first able to visit the archive in person. Next slide, please.
So my example of an instruction session using the newspaper activity includes the Intro to Digital History class with Dr. John Legg from the History Department. Dr. Legg is new to Loyola, and he reached out to us personally to collaborate on a digital humanities project. For this course, we worked with our digital projects assistant, Jessica Perry, to develop an Introduction to Archives module on Canvas for the students to complete ahead of their visit. And for this class, we completed 2 sessions total. The first session involved a visit to the reading room where they completed the newspaper activity with various issues of the Maroon. And the second session involved a digitization workshop where students digitized photographs from our collection for their final project. The final project consisted of a digital exhibit called Loino Digital that used GIS mapping. And at the end of the first session, students were given a folder with 2 to 3 photographs from an unprocessed photographs collection to choose from for the digitization workshop. The photographs were pulled from the Office of Institutional Advancement. And the goal of the final project was for students to scan the photographs, create metadata, write about their topic in the context of university history using the Maroon newspaper as a primary source. So the photographs range from topics such as Greek life, arts, Black Student Union, to specific buildings on campus, such as the Dana Center, the library, and law school, so that students had a specific architectural marker or an aspect of student life to research. Next slide, please. For the digitization workshop, we use the Media Services Station in our Learning Commons, which have 8 stations total with a desktop and scanner. So we assigned 2 students per station and provided them with a detailed instruction manual. Janine, Jessica, and I walked around the room and answered questions and monitored their progress. But from this experience, we learned a lot about what did or didn't work, both with the Canvas module and the digitization workshop. So it was as much a learning experience for us as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the students' final projects are showcased on the Omeka exhibit titled Loino Digital, and it maps out specific locations on campus that students researched and digitized images for. An example I include here is a story titled Loyola, the Cold War, and the Nuclear Age. This student had been given photographs of the old main library building from the 70s. And the student chose to focus their research on a single detail from the photograph, which was the sign for a fallout shelter at the entrance of the library. Next slide, please. The student used the digital Maroon newspaper on the Louisiana Digital Library to conduct research on the fallout shelter signs and the threat of nuclear war between the US and Soviet Union. In this particular article, they highlight a discussion of the potential for nuclear war in 1961. I like this example in particular because I had assumed with a photo like this that the student would write about the history of the main library on campus, but instead the student closely observed the photograph, found something specific within it to focus on, and conducted research around that. So it was really rewarding to see how the photographs collection in the Maroon newspaper served as a vehicle for research and exploration into campus life and the historical context surrounding these images. Next slide, please. And this slide is just to show the topics that we covered in the Canvas module. Section 1 is an introduction to archives, and Section 2 focuses on digitization. Section 1 basically covers what we normally would discuss during our instruction sessions, but having students work through this module before class allowed us to devote more time to the activity itself and spend less time talking about like reading room guidelines. Next slide, please.
So for our future goals, we would like to continue to incorporate the maroon into instruction, as it's been really well received by the students and faculty. And we'd like to expand our outreach into other departments across campus to expose students to primary source instruction. And we've been talking about including more active learning activities in general. But then lastly, on a personal note, I'm interested in exploring the use of Ignatian pedagogy, since we are a Jesuit institution and the pedagogy aligns with evaluation and analysis that we're already doing, but it includes deeper reflection and how to utilize what we learn in order to inform meaningful actions that can be applied to our communities and society. Next slide, please. And that is it for us. Thank you so much, and we'll be happy to answer your questions at the end.
Alrighty, well, hello everybody. My name is Kaylee. I am the instruction archivist at the University of Buffalo. And for my part of the presentation, I will be talking about how I incorporate the University of Buffalo student newspaper, The Spectrum, as a primary source on campus unrest. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides are going to be contextual, some background setting of what the Spectrum is and the history of campus unrest at Buffalo. Starting with the Spectrum, it was formed in 1950 after earlier student newspapers were consolidated into one. And as it still exists today, the goals of the Spectrum were to serve as an independent newspaper that provides professional and uncensored coverage of issues facing the university's community. And it being both independent and centering uncensored coverage is two important tenets for why they were able to document campus unrest in the way that they were, that we'll get into in a second. Featured within the Spectrum is campus news, opinion columns, sports, and feature stories written and organized by students. Next slide, please. Campus unrest at the university, like with many other campuses across the country in the 60s and 70s, was a prevalent issue. Just like with other students across the country, students at Buffalo were concerned with issues like communism and the Red Scare, the Vietnam War, civil rights, and police occupation of campus. Though they shared concerns like others across the country, Buffalo had some of its own unique concerns, like with the Buffalo 9 and Project Themis. Next slide, please. And I did just want to briefly talk about the Buffalo 9 and Project Themis, just because those were two very large concerns for students here. And they happen to be happening at the same time. The Buffalo 9 were a group of Vietnam War protesters that included a couple of Buffalo students who were arrested for resisting the draft. And then Project Themis was a large research project at the university that was funded by the Department of Defense. And it caused a lot of just distrust and upset in not only the student body, but faculty at the university as well. And because both of those things were happening at the same time and started to cause a lot of unrest in students, there were intense riots, protests, and sit-ins quite frequently at the university that were all documented in the Spectrum newspaper. And then I teach with these quite frequently because we also have a large collection of complementary material on both of these topics. Next slide, please. When it comes to campus unrest and instruction, it's a topic that's incorporated quite frequently, either because instructors specifically ask for me to incorporate it in instruction, or because I know that it's a topic that we have adequate materials to create a whole session around, and because it's a topic that has historically been demonstrated to be engaging to students. Beyond the Spectrum, the archives contains other material, including photos, ephemera. We have videos that have been digitized, speeches, pamphlets, and more, that when paired with the Spectrum, provide a more holistic picture of this moment in time at the university. During these instruction sessions, I often highlight articles from the Spectrum and place them next to different types of complementary archival sources. So the spectrums that I use in instruction most frequently are bound editions. And because of that, we have multiple editions in the same volume, which can be overwhelming. So sometimes I will highlight specific articles with a little marker that I want students to be looking at, and then I place complementary materials next to that. So as you can see in some of the pictures, for example, I might have an article about the Buffalo Nine, and then next to the spectrum, I'll have a pamphlet about the Buffalo Nine next to some burned draft cards. Or in the collection, we have a tear gas canister that was used in one of the protests that I pair alongside a photo with a tear gas canister from that protest and an article from the Spectrum about that same protest. And then another example I really wanted to highlight was from a time that the Spectrum was censored in 1967, which you can see in the bottom two right photos. Rather than printing the article that had been originally written in for the Spectrum, the printer that the school was using at the time left the pages blank. And this created a lot of upset in the students and led to a lot of advocacy. So in the folder next to that I pair next to the Spectrum, the censored version, there are memos, correspondence, flyers about protests, from both the student's perspective and the administrator's perspective on the response to this censorship. Students were advocating for administrative response to not only find a new printer, but to create resolutions that would prevent future censorship in the future. And I like to pair these together because it provides a good example of the primary source of the censored spectrum alongside multiple perspectives and documentation surrounding that event. And then something else I wanted to point out is that the spectrum has been completely digitized and is accessible to researchers beyond and students beyond their time in special collections, which is helpful for them, but also very helpful to me because it's text searchable. So I'm able to look up any topics within the spectrum, which helps to prepare for these instruction sessions. Next slide, please. So while the spectrum and its documentation of campus unrest is more specific to Buffalo's history, I see a broader value of using student newspapers within instruction. I have found that it helps students connect with the history of their own institution and with the voices of students who came before them. So while activism and campus unrest are topics that students are naturally drawn to, I found that the spectrum is additionally effective for other topics and themes. So I've highlighted a couple up at the top here. For instance, we have Willie Evans, who was a football player for the university in the 50s, and he was playing when they were asked to go to the Tangerine Bowl in Florida. But the stipulation was that essentially the team could only play if they did not play with their two black players, one of them being Willie Evans. And the team did not agree to this, and they did not play in the game. So within Willie's collection, he has a scrapbook and documentation of his experience playing on the team during this bowl. And then we have Spectrum articles written about this. So I like to pair those two together. And then on the right, I have an example of a time I was preparing for a tour for a women in STEM group at the university. And they had asked me to pull material about the history of women engineers. And so I had been pulling all these material that I knew about in collections. And then I feel like I had like a little light bulb above my head, and I was like, oh, I should look at the spectrum. I'm sure there's something in the spectrum. So using that text search functionality, I was able to find articles written about women engineers at the university and their efforts for equality. And I wanted to highlight this because it shows the value of just looking at the student newspapers to see what's been documented on certain things. It's very helpful when preparing, and it teaches me things about the history of the university that I didn't know about. I find that when I'm using the spectrum in instruction, there are less barriers for students in understanding certain topics. Administrative and other institutional documents that I might be using in classes are initially more intimidating to students. So when I feature spectrums that are written about the same topic, I find that students are very interested in looking at that first because it's more approachable and uses language that's more approachable to them. And then having complementary material next to that is makes them feel more confident to engage with after they've looked at the spectrum. Okay, next slide, please. When students and I are discussing campus unrest in the spectrum, a topic that always comes up is social media. In 2023, the spectrum shifted from being print to an online only publication. Since then, fewer students are aware that it still exists. In class sessions, I am always hearing from students that they didn't know the spectrum was around, or they'll be looking at an article about campus unrest and they'll say, "Why isn't it like this anymore?" Or "Why don't we talk about campus unrest anymore?" And so it creates a great learning opportunity for students to not only look at the spectrum as it exists today, and to compare their experience looking at documentation of campus unrest in the past versus presently. And then we discuss how students share their opinions or are learning the opinions of others that they're at school with. And often they talk about social media. They talk about the value in social media in that it is able to spread information quickly, but because there isn't a centralized source like the spectrum in print more accessible, they're less aware about protests that are happening on campus, or they're less aware about problems that students are facing across the campus. And then other conversations that we have always lead to digital preservation. Because the spectrum is only produced digitally, students ask, well, how will students in the future be able to look at these articles that are coming out right now? And so then I feel like I have conversations with the digital archivist that I work with very frequently about how she's web crawling the Spectrum's website weekly. But then, of course, there are other concerns that come with digital preservation and the fragility of digital preservation that students aren't thinking about and they're always interested in learning about. So as you can see, using the student newspapers has led to a lot of valuable conversations and thought-provoking conversations. Ultimately, the spectrum demonstrates the power of using student voices as historical evidence. Whether documenting campus unrest, recording everyday aspects of student life, or reflecting broader social and political movements, the newspaper provides a unique window into the university's past. And it helps students to see the archives as repositories of their own voices and that they are a part of the ongoing history of the university. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jen.
Thanks, Kaylee. So my name is Jen Hoyer, and I'm going to actually lead an activity now. So I'm going to stop the recording while we do something that's a little bit more active.